Obviously, huge spoilers here for 9.1, but right now we are on to some crazy speculations. In the PTR, we learned that the Stonewright, one of the original Vantir, is actually related to Elune, and she uses Elune's powers, which has huge implications for Revendreth and the Warcraft universe as a whole. Now, this entire thing is completely confusing, as Blizzard literally retconned some information from like 3 months ago. But let's try to untangle this mess as much as possible and speculate about what exactly is Elune doing in Revendreth. Brought to you by Gamivo.com. Make sure to click the link in the description and get Shadowlands as well as Game Time at discounted prices. If you haven't followed the newest leaks, let me get you up to speed in the quickest manner possible. We don't know how exactly the Denethrius was created, but it is thought that he formed Revendreth himself and that he just existed as an eternal one. Then, in order to maintain his realm, he created the very first Vantir. Key here is that when you play through Revendreth, you may have seen that the Vantir are actually created from mortal souls that wanted to serve the realm, and that is obviously still the case, but the first Vantir, the very first few, were literally willed into existence by Denethrius himself, and they were never actually alive. Some of these immortal ones are Prince Renatal, the Curator, Stonewright, but we'll stop here. I'll get to that in a bit, as Blizzard literally retconned this, apparently as an in-game, in-universe mistake. Well, after the event here, Denethrius created the Nathrezim to serve as the ultimate infiltrators, and he sent them on missions to attack Death's rivals. Despite their intelligence and cunning, when they attempted to infiltrate the Light, they were caught. The Light got really pissed off and they launched a massive invasion against Revendreth, and the consequences of this you can obviously see up to this day within the zone. Maldraxxus, the protectors of the Shadowlands, didn't want to help them, so the only way to protect themselves was to create their own army. Denethrius, through the Stonewright, created the Stoneborn, and they managed through many sacrifices to repel the Naaru and to save the realm. However, after this Pyrrhic victory, Stonewright got really pissed off at the death of her children, and she essentially forced Denethrius to exile the Dreadlords. I'm guessing Denethrius here was trying to pretend like they did this on their own accord, despite him obviously giving the orders, so he did this to distance himself, or apparently distance himself, or at least in the eyes of the Stonewright. Then fast forward thousands and thousands of years later, the Nathrezim are still exiled. Renatal started a rebellion. He wanted to get Stonewright to his cause, but she refused, as she thought he could never defeat Denethrius and that the rebellion was bound to fail. Well, fast forward again, now to 9.1, we did defeat Tsar Denethrius, and now Stonewright is kinda just hanging out there. We learn that the Dreadlords are on a full-scale assault mission, infiltrating literally everything there is to infiltrate, freeing Denethrius, and now, most interestingly, within this quest, they actually steal the medallion from the Stonewright, which means that obviously she is no longer working with Denethrius or his agents. Now, let's get down to the meat of this new spoiler information. During this quest, Renatal comes and says, "My dear Stonewright, harvester of Wrath, wielder of Elune," and he stops there, obviously talking about Elune. Then in the French version of the game, during a fight against a Dreadlord during this infiltration quest, as Stonewright is obviously casting Moonfire here, the Nathrezim says, "Your Stoneborn will never find us, and your precious Elune has no power here." Then Blizzard decided to change this and update it, but obviously they didn't add this for no reason. They wanted to reveal something, and I don't really think anyone saw this coming, but apparently the Stonewright, the person behind the Stoneborn, is related to Elune. What does this mean? Now, I know you may be confused, and trust me, I'm confused as well, and even Blizzard is obviously confused on this, as they're changing things left and right, but let's try to untangle this whole mess. So, initially, when you talked to the Stonewright, she said, "I've sent many people to the Shadowlands like you back when I was alive." Now, if you follow the story, you may have thought, what? When were you actually alive? Through Renatal's notes, he told us that the original Vantir were just willed into being by Denatrius, and that they were never alive, the ones such as himself, the Curator, Stonewright. However, Blizzard retconned this in 9.1 as apparently Renatal goofed and the Curator corrected him. She said, "Renatal, ask me in the future, I think you may be confusing things here. Apparently, the original Harvester of Wrath was in fact non-alive, willed into being by Denatrius, but her powers were at some point stripped away and she was exiled, and in her place, a mortal soul, the Stonewright, was added. The Stonewright in life was said to have done terrible things in the name of protecting her people, but her Sin Stone is apparently hidden really well, so we still don't know what is it that she did." However, let me make a very bold, but I'd say quite correct guess here. What if the Stonewright was one of the original Night Warriors, soldiers of Elune, that might have been consumed by the form and then she turned on her own people? Then later she arrived in Revendreth and Denatrius saw her as a really powerful and useful asset. Maybe she joined during this light invasion and Denatrius was quite desperate, so he formed a pact with her and Elune indirectly, and maybe the Stoneborn were actually created with the help of Elune. It would obviously make sense, because how exactly was Revendreth and the Stoneborn Legion able to defeat the all-powerful Light? And it was said that the Light unleashed their full wrath upon the realm. Why I think this might just be the case is because if you follow the Ardenweald storyline, we are searching for other Night Warriors across the Shadowlands, hunting them down essentially to save Tyrande, and maybe not all of them are actually in Ardenweald. What if the ultimate Night Warrior is actually the Stonewright, and she will be the one that will save Tyrande from being consumed by the Night Warrior form, as she will learn from the Stonewright's mistakes? I think this storyline might very well be possible. Seriously, with so many hints, it seems quite likely that Elune is actually a first one. I mean, back in Legion, Khadgar essentially told us that Elune was the one that created the Prime Naru, and she is obviously all present throughout the entire universe with her Night Warrior form. We also know that the first ones are like the architects of the universe, and that they were there before everything was anywhere. So what if the first ones are like a mediating force, and they realize that the balance must be kept so that no force can get too powerful, so they like to side with whoever is losing? For example, Death was getting way too powerful, so they decided to imprison the Jailer. The Light was taking over Death, so Elune stepped up and created an army to stop their advance. The Voidlords were taking over way too many planets, so the Night Warriors were there to stop them. Death was once again getting too powerful, so Elune empowered Tyrande to attack the realm. Obviously reaching a bit here, but think about it, I think this theory is quite likely. At the moment, it is still quite early to say anything for sure, but obviously Elune is playing quite a big role here. The Night Warriors are her manifestations, and I think that all of this will tie into explaining why the Jailer was actually imprisoned in the first place, what was his betrayal, and that this might just be the key to solving the mystery that is the Shadowlands. Thank you for watching. Check out what could be the Jailer's true form once he gets the Arbiter Sigil, and also check out Doran's Academy for videos on real-world history and science. See you next time.